Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I am your host, Ann Dolin, and I am a former Fairfax County, Virginia public school teacher. And 26 years ago, I left my teaching position and I started Educational Connections. And since then, I've been leading my team of tutors, executive function coaches, and college consultants. We work with students. It started out as more of a DC-based business in the Mid-Atlantic, and now we serve students across the country. But today, we're here to discuss an educator's guide, practical executive function skills to help your students stay focused and organized in the classroom. Now, we know what we're hearing from all sides, from everywhere. From teachers, many of you will often say, oh, executive functions, I can't even get my kids to do half of their homework. And then at home, parents will say, oh, I have to stay on top of him to get anything done. I feel like the homework police. And then kids will say things like, oh, don't worry, I'll get to it eventually. Now, it's easy to think that when we see these issues with focus and finish and motivation, that they may be tied to perhaps a student just being lazy or not caring about school or just a poorly motivated student. But we actually know that many times behaviors like this come from weakness in the frontal lobe of the brain, right behind the forehead. This part is called the frontal lobe. And it's really, really important for school success because it houses these cognitive abilities called executive functions. And there are actually 8 of them. But today we're going to focus on really 4 main ones that really have the most to do with school. So inhibition means kind of batting away distractions and making yourself focus. Initiation is a fancy word for getting started, especially when you don't want to do something. Everybody can start on something they love, but it's really hard to start on something like math when you don't like it in the first place. Organization and planning. Knowing what you have to do and kind of having a plan. I'm going to do this, that, and the other thing, and staying organized and getting it done. And then one of the hardest and last executive function skills to come online, at least in brain development, is something called self-monitoring or maybe self-awareness. But it's really a person's ability to say, you know what? Actually, I've been looking at this other tab on my laptop when I should be paying attention to the lesson in front of me. And knowing this probably isn't a good idea, and then self-correcting. That is self-monitoring. And, there's lots of other executive functions like working memory and shifting from one thing to another is certainly emotional control. But whenever we talk about executive functions, sometimes people say, that sounds a lot like, ADHD. Is this the same thing? And actually, it kind of is. Well, first, let's start out by saying there is no ADD anymore. The correct term is ADHD. And there's 3 kinds of ADHD: hyperactive, inattentive, and a combination of both. Most students we work with, I would say, are combination or more inattentive type. We often see the hyperactive type students when they're younger. But when people refer to ADD, they're usually referring to ADHD, just the inattentive type. Now, here's the thing. Everybody with a diagnosis of ADHD also has executive function weaknesses. But not everybody with executive function weaknesses meets the clinical definition of ADHD. To me, it totally doesn't matter. If you're struggling with these things in the classroom or at home, you need help. There needs to be something to make life a little bit easier for you. If not, oftentimes students get caught in this doom loop. They exhibit a negative behavior, or maybe they get a bad grade. They hear criticism from others, maybe the parent, the teacher, their sports coach. That results in lowered confidence. And when kids don't feel great about themselves, they just put forth a lot less effort. So it looks like, again, this motivation issue. And then in turn, that negative behavior happens again, or maybe that bad grade, or you don't turn in an assignment. And now you're in this doom loop. And the doom loop stinks for everybody. It stinks for kids, for parents, and definitely when you see it as a teacher. Today, we're going to talk about getting out of that doom loop. And I can't think of anybody better than to help me explain all of this than Rachael Moss. Rachael is an executive function coach with me here at Educational Connections. And another part of her role with the company is our professional development specialist. She's a former classroom teacher, both at the high school and the college level. And she has 2 master's degrees, one in literature and also in secondary education. So Rachael, so glad that you're here.
Oh, Anne, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So just to preface it, this afternoon, we're going to talk about 2 main things: strategies you can use in your classroom, and then also strategies you can share with parents that can make executive functions a little bit easier at home too. Because we all know that if parents are doing some of these things at home, everybody's the better for it. So Rachael, let's start out with strategies for teachers in the classroom.
Absolutely.
I know that you're a firm believer in leading with learning, especially when it comes to schedules. Tell me a little bit about having a routine and having a schedule for students.
It seems so simple. It's one of those things where we probably are doing it, and if we can do it a little bit more intentionally, it has great impact for executive function. So having a good schedule where kids really know what is happening every day, and maybe even with older kids, you can give them a schedule for a week, for a month ahead. What you're doing there is you're modeling that plan and organize executive function. And so you're really setting your classroom space up for success. And for a lot of us in the classroom, we will share things about our lesson plans online, or if we have an online learning management system. So this is something that we're already doing as classroom teachers, but having that intention, really thinking about how that fits with executive function, it really leads students to success.
So when kids walk into the classroom, they know, okay, this is what I'm going to be doing today. This is my expectation of me for getting things done.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Let's kind of shift gears and talk about formative assessment. Tell us about that, Rachael.
So formative assessment is probably something that a lot of educators in this group have heard of. So this may just be, some delightful review for you. Formative assessment is an active and continual process where teachers and students are working together. And they're both gathering evidence of learning, and they're keeping in mind some guiding questions. So they're thinking, where am I going? Where am I right now in the learning process? And so on this screen is sort of like the quick version of formative assessment. It's, of course, much more complex than this, but key to formative assessment in the classroom is a focus on a learning target. And this should be in student-centered language. And it works for kids at any level. In our own lesson plans, we write those students will be able to statements, and sometimes we post them in the room, but that isn't a learning target. A learning target is when it is in student-centered language so that kids can identify what they are learning. We also, in formative assessment, want to give students things that they can look for. Now, I'm going to give an example. I'm an English teacher. All of my examples are about literature. So if I'm teaching Great Expectations and I want students to look for examples of the time period when the novel was written, the Regency period in England, I will give them things that they can look for. Look for characters to be focused on the price of things. Look for characters to be focused on their social status. And then we can, of course, link that back to the learning target. Perhaps the learning target in that lesson is we will learn about the Regency era and find examples in our text. While you're doing this, you're also giving consistent feedback that isn't about saying, oh, hey, good job. Hey, you did something right. But it's really about using language that is pivoting students towards those skills and areas that you want to teach. So if you're teaching analysis, it's moving away from, hey, good job, to listen to that student's analysis. Listen to this great analysis that Anne just shared with us about great expectations, so that you are continually checking student understanding, and then students can continually check their own understanding. It helps every kid, and it really helps kids with executive function challenges.
I love that, Rachel, because it's almost like you're telling them what's coming up. It's like previewing, which we know is so good for students. Especially, I don't know if you've seen this a lot with kids these days, but sometimes I think they're kind of like Swiss cheese. They kind of like have holes in their learning, and sometimes they're in and out of focus during a lesson in class, and sometimes they're getting something and sometimes they're not. But by doing that, look for, automatically it gets their attention, and they're like, oh, wait, okay, no, I need to be looking for this. I love that. All right, so let's talk about replacing the exit ticket to something that's related to executive function. How does that work?
Yeah, so this is an easy way to kind of modify something that we probably are all doing in our classrooms using exit tickets. And so, that when we think about the exit ticket, we might think about a math classroom where you're going over a certain concept and you're giving one problem to see student understanding. Well, a pitfall that really happens with kids that struggle with executive function skills comes whenever we give them directions. And in my experience as a teacher and as I'm coaching students with educational connections, kids really have a hard time when they are working solo, even if we've given them what we think are great directions. So this is something that you can do in your classroom to just check that understanding of some of the processes. Questions like, in your own words, describe what the main idea is of what we're doing in this project. Tell me, when is the work due? What resources will you need to complete your work? What will be graded in your work? I also like using phrasing that helps kids with their own writing and sharing information. Like sometimes I'll say to students on an exit ticket like this, how would you describe the directions to this project to a younger kid, to get them to think about it in simpler terms and to break it down even farther?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, because a lot of times kids, you think in class, they've got it. They know what to do. And then they don't turn it in. Or they're late, so this really helps them to solidify what they're doing. And even though, we might think, oh, it's in the portal, it's really just that check at the end to make sure that they're all good. Sometimes we're working with kids and they're really just checked out, and they just seem like they're not having it. They're not, especially, we see this a lot with older kids, but younger kids too. And, when you see that student who's chronically underperforming, they're really not being verbal about what's happening. How can you use a rating scale or even something like a numerical scale to talk about the difficulties of an assignment and to figure out, what's getting in their way of getting it done?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've worked with teenagers my whole life, and I got to tell you, sometimes their frustration about not understanding something comes out as rage. So having them identify how maybe stressors involved in their work are influencing their feelings, and then really bringing that back to the problem at hand. It's not that you're mad at your science homework. On a scale of 1 to 5, how difficult is this for you? What is also your motivation to do it? Because when kids are frustrated, that motivation goes way down. So this is a great way to help kids identify really where their feelings are coming from, and help them understand that stress over their work doesn't mean it's impossible. Naming and noticing that stress, you can get past it then.
Yeah, I like the rating scale. I had a student I was working with a few weeks ago, and we were talking about math, and he was so shut down. And I said, well, how are you feeling about this on a scale of 1 to 5? And he said, I'm a 1. And just by giving it that number, then he could talk about it. And it just kind of opened up the dialogue. So I think when kids don't have words, even older students, we all know what a Google review is. They can put things in numbers for sure. All right. One of the other issues, often we see with kids is that they themselves can be optimists. Like, oh, I can totally write this 3-paragraph essay in 30 minutes. That's easy. 10 minutes a paragraph. They haven't even considered. They haven't done the research. They don't have a rough draft, all these things. And so often when we work with them in the classroom and send them home, I see this on the other end at home, that students don't think about what can get in their way in terms of anticipated obstacles. How do you work with students in this case?
Oh, I mean, as teachers, we all know about the obstacles, even if the kids don't. And I think as teachers, one thing that we always identify too, I think, is just older people. Things like, cell phones, that's a big obstacle. And you identified some of the obstacles that kids come up with when they really don't understand the work that's going to be involved. I mean, I don't know about you, but I currently have 3 different apps on my phone that just limit me from using Instagram, because that is an obstacle to me doing my own work. Kids have lots of different responsibilities and lots of different distractions. It's also hard for older kids when they have a really busy schedule. Like, I'm thinking about a lot of kids that I work with and a lot of kids that I've taught in the past that are taking multiple honors classes, or kids that are really involved in sports or extracurriculars. So anticipated obstacles, it's good for us as teachers to be able to have conversations with them about how their work fits into their total life, and to help them with some of those obstacles with some strategies that can, help them get the work done. Do you want me to talk about this?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
I gotta be real with you. I love talking about the Pomodoro method. So
I love it too.
Yeah, this might be one that you're familiar with. I know that a lot of teachers are. I actually first learned about this through my husband, because they use this in banking. That's his career path. The Pomodoro technique was started by Francesco Cirillo. He is currently a world famous efficiency expert, works with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. But when he was a university student, he was a kid who didn't want to read his sociology textbook. So he grabbed his kitchen timer, set it for 2 minutes, and lo and behold, he figured out that he could pay attention to this book that he thought he couldn't. He then studied the human attention span, and he found out that we have a maximum of 25 minutes where we can actively pay attention. And if we as educators really dig into that 25 minutes, we can help our students. So in the classroom, this can look like giving students 15 minutes to work on some math problems or a writing assignment. Not to say who can do this the fastest, but to really help students understand how much they individually can get done in a short amount of time. And that can be empowering. So if there's a student that's not motivated to do that math, but they learn that in the classroom, I can get 10 problems done in 15 minutes. Now they know that that 20 problem set is going to take them 20 minutes to do at home. So, this is something that you can use in the classroom, and then students can use outside of the classroom. And it can really help with some of those pitfalls. Students can take their time to work on their assignments. And I realize that there's one part of the Pomodoro method I haven't mentioned yet. It's not just working for 25 or 15 minutes and stopping. It's also building in short breaks that are also timed. So ideally, you work for 15 or 25 minutes, then you take a timed 5-minute break where you fully move away from the work, and then you go to another timed work session. So this breaks up the work, helps students with those attention-related obstacles, and gives them a strategy that will really streamline their work.
Yeah, I love it. And, Pomodoro method, kids love that. They really, really do. And sometimes I think it helps them to feel better when you say, you know what, it's okay. No, it's really hard to sustain attention after 25 minutes. But for younger kids, we can even set the timer for shorter minutes of time. We call this the 5 minutes of fury, or tolerable 10. And the idea is, let's see, can you work as hard as you can, best you can, focus as much as you can, just for 10 minutes? And it kind of gets kids over the hump of getting started. They don't usually need to take a break. They can usually keep on going.
Yeah.
This is one of my favorite timers. You've probably seen it before. It's called the time timer. And especially younger kids, they are not good at estimating time. So if you say, hey, everybody, we're going to work on this for 20 minutes, they don't really know what 20 minutes is.
Yeah.
And so to see that red disc moving is so helpful for kids with executive function weaknesses, because now they have a visual to go with elapsed time. Timers can be used in the classroom. We encourage our students, really you should have a timer at your workspace, also have a whiteboard. That's really awesome too. And ideally it's a physical timer, not the timer on your phone, for obvious reasons. All right, Rachel, let's switch gears and talk about strategies at home. Because I know parents come to teachers and say, hey, ideas for this, or we might want to share something that's worked in the classroom. Why is this home connection helpful?
I mean, I don't know about your experience in the classroom, Anne, but it was like every year you always have parents that they really value your insight and advice as a teacher. So if we can have some things like in our little bag of tricks that we can pull out that we know work, those are things that can, help us when we're writing those emails or having those conversations with parents. But it also really helps parents because at the end of the day, they are worried about their kids. And they really want to make home life a productive and happy place.
Yeah, for sure. So let's start out with that concept. I'm going to go back to the formative assessment, look fors.
Yeah.
It's a form of previewing. And so is, as parents, we get ready on, Saturday morning for the week or Sunday evening for the week. It's also another form of previewing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, having a Sunday session, a Friday night session, that session where you're getting ready for the week, it really sets everybody up for success. And it's not just academics. It's also things like, when will we need to have the baseball bag packed so that you can take it out of the house and I, as the parent, do not have to chauffeur it later to the school? Or which days are you going to be buying lunch and which days are you going to be packing lunch? So it's really looking at the family's week like as a whole, and not just when is the science homework due or when do you have to read that book for English class. And this works with kids of any age. For younger kids, you might just want to start with a week. For older kids, you could plan out a month, but it's having that. We talked about structure in the classroom. This kind of structure at home really, again, helps with that planning and organization executive function. If families are doing this, these skills are going to transfer over to kids and they're going to transfer over into different areas, definitely academically.
It's something you can download if it makes sense to you. It's a weekly calendar. And it's a time when parents can say, let's talk about the week ahead. Even if they don't have homework, what's going on after school, soccer on Tuesday, choir practice on Thursday. And something like this should ideally, it's a conversation with the student. It should be written by the student. And it should be in a public place, like the refrigerator or somewhere that everybody can see it. Rachel, switching gears a bit, and I want to kind of get into this issue of staying up too late, dealing with procrastination. I was just reading a study today because I'm doing a talk on procrastination next week, and I saw the statistic that showed that procrastination in the last 30 years has quadrupled, especially more recently, likely because of the constant distractions kids have. And so as parents, we often think, you need to finish earlier. And so we're all focused on the finish time. But a better strategy is to back it up and think, okay, well, what is that start time? Tell us a little bit about that.
This is a great way to talk to kids, even for teachers to talk to kids and for teachers to talk to parents about some of those struggles that families have about doing work. So I really think it's important for kids to be able to identify, when am I most productive? Now, when I was in like 9th grade, I don't know why, I would get up at like 5 a.m. and do my homework. There was like, I was just like this little early bird for a minute, but then I was also like in bed at 9. I don't, I don't know what was up with my circadian rhythm, but for a couple years, that before school time was my productive time. And that is when I would get the majority of my work done. Some kids want to start as soon as they hit the house after they're off the bus, get out the books, get the homework done. Some kids need a little break, need to decompress when they get home from school. So the time frame conversation isn't about like an hour and a minute. It's more about thinking about the activities of the day and when you have the energy and motivation to do your work. And every kid will be different.
Yeah, you're right. And really, if you see that kids are staying up too late, and that is a complaint from parents, talking about, even starting before dinner,
Yeah.
even if you're just, looking to see, okay, what do I have? That is a good starting point for kids. Another issue we often see with students with ADHD or executive function weaknesses is really this chronic issue with organization. Tell us about the launching pad and how parents can make that a little bit easier at home.
I don't know if anybody else in this audience loves a launching pad, but I'm a launching pad girly. Like I do this for myself. If you're not familiar, I really want you to think about a rocket getting ready to launch. It is a prepared physical area. There are protocols, there are countdowns, and everything is there that is necessary for success. So a launching pad can be an area in your home where you keep, for kids, you keep the school bag, you keep the shoes. If you have a science project that has to go to school the next day, the night before, you put it in the launching pad. So it's really where we think about our materials that we need for success during the day. And this also really works. I'm sure that every teacher does something like this. I know that my launching pad was always my car. Pack the back seat before I go to bed, make sure everything is in there. So I'm walking into my car with just my coffee and a smile. Everything is there for me that I need for the day. And it's something that you do the night before with the physical materials that you need so that you absolutely have them when you need them.
For sure. And the
Yeah.
launching pad is great if it's by the door from which the student exits in the morning, because then they're kind of like launching into this new day in an organized fashion. And there's a lot less rushing around before school. And that's always helpful in families. Well, we'd love to go to Q&A. This is a half-hour presentation. And I thought that we'd spend about 10 minutes really, talking about any questions that you have, or if you have insights on how you've best helped kids with ADHD or executive function weaknesses in your classroom, we would love to hear them as well. I want to share with you a little bit about what we do. We offer one-to-one virtual support in 4 different areas: subject tutoring, executive function coaching, test preparation for the SAT and ACT, and then also college consulting. And we also run programs for schools where we will work with classrooms of kids that where the administrators or the teachers want to work on executive function skills. And we have a whole program for working with students over a period of time. And we also do professional development. And you can find more on our website, ectutoring.com. And then a lot of the resources that I spoke about and lots of other stuff, we put on a download for you. And you can find that at ectutoring.com/teachers. And so some of the things that I mentioned earlier with the URL, it's the same one, and you can get everything there. All right, Rachel. So let's see if anybody has a question or a comment. A lot of people asked if we were recording this, and yes, and feel free to share it with anybody in your school if you would like to. I'm curious, has anybody found something in their classroom that's worked well for them when it comes to executive functions? And Rachel, is there anything else that you want to share, maybe that we didn't have in the slides, that you found particularly helpful for your students?
I have to say one thing I'm very proud of as a teacher is that I always gave my students a physical paper calendar at the start of every month that told them what days they had homework, when the test was, because let's face it, I knew what my month was going to look like. I would always try to plan things so I had time to grade. I never wanted kids to wait for their papers. Big lesson I learned my first year. And what I found is that my students who struggled, and I had students who struggled mightily, that little piece of paper was like a light in the dark for them. They were never afraid to come into my room because they knew what was going to happen. If it was a month where, and I had like pop quizzes, I would put at the top of the calendar, pop quizzes are possible this month. So that kids were never, it was like, it was known. There were some vague unknowns, but nothing was scary for them. So I'm not just somebody that, thinks that these are nice things. I have a lot of evidence from working with hundreds of kids that these strategies, though very simple, have great and dramatic impact.
Rachael, a lot of people would say, yeah, but all that stuff is on the portal. I post my homework assignments.
Yeah.
I put everything that they need there. Why is also having that physical copy helpful to kids?
In my experience, there are different things that connect with different kids. I have kids that are very technologically savvy where they don't want anything on paper. Other kids, they really want something physical that they can check off, that they can look at, that they can check. So the first thing that I think is important is giving students multiple ways to access information. The other thing that I know as a teacher is you can think that you have given students the clearest directions of all, and that doesn't mean they're clear to the kids. So I also am a big believer in giving them every single path to success. So if one kid benefits from having a physical calendar, that is something that I'm going to do for every single kid. So I think that as teachers, if we can ease some of the burdens of learning, if we can ease some of those stressors, they're all going to be more successful.
I love that because I've always thought that what's good for kids with ADHD is good for everybody at the end of the day.
Yeah, and the research proves it. So when we put these things into place, the kids who struggle the most, they benefit the most. The kids at the top also benefit. So it's like it rises all little boats. They all get to float and have a nice time.
I love that, Rachael. All right. Well, on that note, let's wrap it up for the afternoon. We so appreciate you joining us today. We hope that you got one or two nuggets that can help you with your students. You're going to see a survey pop up in just a second when you log off, and we'd be so grateful if you would just take 1 minute and fill out that survey. That will help us guide our next sessions. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great day, and it was so nice to meet you. Bye-bye.